1938 was a fateful year in American cultural history. 3 stories from that year link Snow White, Cultural Revolution, and the USA's soft power. Snow White and the end of the Disney century. Walt Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the first cel-animated feature in motion picture history, was released to spectacular success in 1938. Over the next 9 decades, the Disney Corporation, quote, nourished a genial cultural imperialism that magically overran the rest of the globe with the values, expectations and goods of a prosperous middle-class United States. In 1938, European leaders, including French diplomat Alexis Saint-Léger, who won the 1960 Nobel Prize in Literature, and there's a link to the Nobel Archive post on that in the post, responded to Germany's claim over the Sudetenland. They sought to prevent world war. US President Roosevelt stated it was 100% wrong the US would join a Stop Hitler bloc. America remained neutral and has ever since blamed Europe for appeasement. Meanwhile, American citizens succumbed to panic and mass delusion after Orson Welles' radio broadcast of The War of the Worlds. In 1938, Pearl Buck became the 3rd USA citizen in 8 years to win the Nobel Prize in Literature, and there's a link to my post on Pearl Buck in the post. Her sentimental stories of China reflected her life as an American evangelical Christian missionary in China. The sentimental Swedes loved them. 10 years later, revolutionary China threw Pearl out, never to return. She campaigned for the rest of her life in service of undemocratic Taiwan. Coincidentally, the last German to win the prize until 1972, Thomas Mann, also emigrated to the USA in 1938. The world's greatest living novelist joined a vast European émigré community that became the foundation of American high culture in the American century. Those 3 stories of 1938 lingered through the American century. 2025 is shaping up as a less successful year in American cultural history. The remake of Snow White has flopped. In contrast, a Chinese animated fantasy adventure film adapted from Chinese mythology in a 16th century novel, Investiture of the Gods, Fang Shen Yanhui Yi, was an astonishing success. Following its release on the first day of the 2025 Chinese New Year, Ne Zha 2 blew the Disney film trapped in its sentimental history out of the water. Ne Zha 2 became globally the highest grossing animated film and the highest grossing non-English language film. It is the highest grossing film of 2025 and the 5th highest grossing film of all time. It may climb further. Disneyland is so American 20th century. Trump's Cultural Revolution. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., the ship of fools sails on. Donald Trump inaugurated a new golden age inspired by its 19th century frontier spirit, and there's a link to my earlier post on that issue in the post. But his panicked critics see chaotic delusion an idea is spreading that Donald Trump has unleashed a cultural revolution like the 10 years of chaos instigated by Mao Zedong in 1960s China. China, some USA liberal intellectuals think, has planted the seeds of revenge. For example, Orville Schell claims, quote, there is a precedent for Trump's political blitzkrieg. Mao Zedong, while Mao, who launched China's violent cultural revolution, and Trump share little in the way of geography, ideology, or hairstyle, they can both be described as agents of insurrection. And there's a link to that article in the Post. CNN commentator Fareed Zakaria writes on the Trump University crackdown that as America appears to be copying the worst aspects of China's recent history, China is copying the best aspects of America's striving to take the edge as the United States goes through its own cultural revolution. It is an idea worth testing against history. Timely, too. This is my final post of the World History Tour of World Powers focused on both the USA and culture. Next week, I turn to China. Is Trump unleashing a cultural revolution in the USA? Will it reduce America's soft power or its cultural influence as a civilization state? Most importantly, how can you adapt if, indeed, world culture is becoming less American? Is Trump unleashing a cultural revolution in the USA? Like any historical comparison, the likenesses between events can illuminate aspects of the phenomena, but differences reveal the weaknesses of the comparison. We can see these likenesses and differences in 3 dimensions of the comparison between the Chinese Cultural Revolution and Trump's return to the USA presidency. The historical event, the revolution, and the culture. First, let us look briefly at the overall comparison of these events. How similar are MAGA and Mao's cultural revolutions? On the overall comparison of MAGA and Mao's Red Guards, there are some curious similarities, but deeper differences. Trump is going over the heads of a political elite to galvanise a social movement to, quote, bombard the headquarters in the service of a certain nationalist and nostalgic idea of restoring the purity of the American ideal. He is attacking the deep state like Mao attacked his rival bureaucratic cliques. The targeting of the state apparatus, diversity programs, globalists, and higher education resemble cultural revolution attacks on the 4 olds. Fareed Zakaria focuses especially on criticism of the universities. Quote, the fury with which the Trump administration has turned on academia resembles nothing so much as the early days of the Cultural Revolution. But as yet these attacks are less violent and vehement. Some programs have been defunded. Teachers have not been shamed, beaten and killed. 2 months of Trump 2.0 does not a Chinese cultural revolution make. In ways, Trump 2.0's early months reveal profound dysfunction in American political culture. It may spin out of control. It may bring years of chaos. But 1 million or more people have not died. No one has been sent to a labour camp. The comparison is shallow and insulting. and insulting to the historical trauma of China in those 10 years of chaos. The spate of comparisons of Trump 2.0 with Mao's Cultural Revolution are driven by polemics that compare Trump to that old American meme of the mad foreign dictator. Zakaria evoked the meme when, quote, when an increasingly paranoid Mao Zedong smashed China's established universities, a madness that took generations to remedy. Orville Schell, an American security establishment spokesman on China, indulges in some amateur psychohistory to portray Trump and Mao as madmen haunted by abusive fathers with racist tropes of the subhuman Monkey King. He writes that Trump might lack Mao's skills as a writer and theorist, but he possesses the same animal instinct to confound opponents and maintain authority by being unpredictable to the point of madness. That's Orville Schell, Bombard Their Headquarters, Donald Trump's Cultural Revolution, published, of course, in the Taipei Times. I will return to better histories of the Chinese Cultural Revolution in my world tour of China. There are similarities in the political phenomena of Trump's attempt to restore a certain vision of the American Revolution and to displace his factional opponents. But the events are not in the same league. Perhaps it is another proof of Hegel's dictum. History repeats itself, first as tragedy, secondly as farce. There are many signs that America's cultural power is waning. The loot of the post-war years has lost its lustre. Nobody wants the saccharine slop of Disney's Snow White. The barbarous infantilism of American popular culture is being rejected by older civilizations. Even the technological ascendancy of its iPhone model seems on the way out. Has the world grown tired of American built-in obsolescence modernity? We may be living in a less American world, but for now the USA's soft power is still strong. Its cultural projection is still hard to avoid, especially for citizens of its outer empire like Australians. The Australian Lowy Institute prepares an Asia Power Index that measures cultural influence and other indicators of power. On this index, the USA dominates cultural influence. But within the detail of the index are signs of a sea change. The USA is dominant on two components of cultural influence: cultural projection and information flows. But these two sources of power may be living on borrowed time. Cultural projection measures global brands, cultural exports, and the prestige of skyscrapers. As we have seen with Snow White, brands and prestige can collapse suddenly. Information flows measures international students and the presence of legacy media, major newspapers and TV and radio broadcasts. But legacy media is fading. Moreover, the USA government just closed its propaganda arm, Radio Free Asia. Trump's Cultural Revolution may undercut this source of USA's power. The third component of cultural influence in the Lowy Asia Power Index is people exchanges. This element includes diaspora influence, travel destinations, and, quote, migrant drawing power. On this measure, the USA does not rank number one, but a distant fifth behind China, India, Thailand, and Malaysia. Little Australia almost scores better, even though we are a mere province of the empire, not a civilization state. With 2.8 billion people living in China and India alone, one can only imagine that people exchanges will over time overwhelm American global brands' shallow prestige and soft power. Unlike armies, states and economies, cultural influence can turn on a dime. In a few months, America has turned itself into a chaotic imperialist pariah in a world where globalization is no longer westernization, let alone the flat world vision of America's 1990s illusions. Snow White has been beaten by Ne Zha 2. ChatGPT has been challenged by a deeper shade of Sikh. The real cultural revolution is not happening in the USA. It is happening in global hearts and minds who are adapting to a culture that is less American.